not being strategic enough in my choices while in school. A is saying just not doing it quote unquote right, just like you stated. I'm getting this EDD and it feels like everyone knows way more than me. Brianna says having my mental health deteriorate the way it did in undergrad. Those are some of the things that people have mentioned about being nervous in the chat.
Awesome. So I think that those are all very valid concerns, and a lot of those concerns we will talk about throughout. So thank you all for sharing. And if you have anything throughout, feel free to kind of drop those in the chat. I'm not that great with switching back and forth, so our lovely mistress Alante will do that for you. So just getting started and thinking about some of those potential things that could come along. And so I think a big part of the anxiety around grad school is literally people just have no clue what to expect. And I think what is important to think about is that different parts of your graduate school journey will elicit different types of concerns. By no means is this an exhaustive list, but these are some of the most common things that I tend to see for people who are thinking about what are some things that they're a little bit nervous about, what are some things that they're not sure how to navigate. So with pre-entry, that's everything from graduation through the application process to that summer break where you're transitioning if you're starting in the fall. A lot of those things, of course, are just not really even knowing what to expect. Transitional coping, which is what we see a lot, and that could be trying to figure out where you're going to live, trying to figure out what your schedule is going to look like. For a lot of graduate students, funding is a major concern. So these are stressors that you are bringing from wherever you're coming from before you even step foot onto the campus and step foot into the classroom. So those are just some things that are pretty common that come up. Once you actually get to the campus, or I think someone said that they're online, there's still a level of adjustment. So thinking about, okay, now that you've transitioned either from a working professional, some people are going back to school, some people are transitioning from undergrad or a master's degree to a PhD. With every stage, you have to ask yourself again, who am I? And those identity concerns, I think, are probably one of the more subtle ways that people don't realize that's a mental stressor. People are constantly asking themselves, okay, who am I now? How am I supposed to act now? What are some things I should do now that I'm a graduate student or a professional student that probably I didn't find as acceptable in other stages of my life? So that could be one thing that comes up too. I think, of course, we can all agree that the bulk of the mental stressors come when you're actually doing the coursework. I have this thing that I like to call like just being others and onlys, and especially with graduate students of color, like either you feel other because most times, unless you're in a place where you are able to be around people who are like you, a lot of times you're not, especially as you get higher into higher education. So a lot of times there are a lot of things, I think someone mentioned already, microaggressions that can happen both in and out of the classroom, and then also thinking about what are some other ways that you just are not intentionally supported. I think one thing that we find with a lot of graduate programs is that the infrastructure is not built for diversity. They can say that on their website. They can say that in the pamphlets. They say all of that when they recruit you. But realistically, most times their infrastructure is not built to support students of color and graduate students of color, especially in a way that's going to be conducive to their academic success. And then thinking about departure, I feel like students are probably the most stressed during and leaving. It really feels like a true fight to the finish. And a lot of that is just because there's a whole other level of reorientation that's happening once you finish your coursework. So you're having to prove that everything you learned is enough for you to be granted this piece of paper. You have to prove that you are worthy of getting a job or any of those things. So a lot of feelings of self-worth and confidence and doubt tend to creep in when you get to this stage. And like I said, again, this is not by any means an exhaustive list. These are just some things that could pop up for you. And for some people, they just may not necessarily be able to name them. So as we go throughout, if any of these are feeling like, yes, this is me, if you got a little amen, wave your hand at me, that's fine too. So what's important, again, is to note how these things will show up in different ways or multiple ways throughout your journey. And it's important to name those so that when you name them, you're able to tackle those up front. One thing that I always try to make sure students understand is the root of irrational beliefs. So when we talk about mental health, it's really important to think about, okay, what messages do you send yourself? And a lot of times we don't even consciously think about the messages that we send ourselves. But before you can tackle any part of well-being, you have to be able to name your triggers, and you have to be able to name your truths. And so with an irrational belief, it's usually an unconscious message that you send to yourself. And it's typically rooted in either some deeper level of trauma, or it's a pattern of experiences that have kind of shaped the way that you are operating in whatever space you're in. So I pulled out a few things that I feel like either I have thought, I'll be completely transparent, that I've heard people say, but a lot of this is just thoughts that have come up for me. And we'll talk a lot about how to stop these irrational thoughts, but I think it's really important to be able to identify what is actually irrational first. So having feelings of feeling like you're not good enough, that your work is not enough. I hear this especially with people who either feel like they can't get mentors, if they feel like they miss opportunities or are kind of overlooked in certain ways. A lot of times some of those irrational beliefs will pop up for them. Feeling like things have to be perfect. Perfectionism is a huge trait that we see a lot in graduate students, especially in some of those things with perfectionism that come up are just this all or nothing thinking, feeling like if I can't have everything, then I have nothing, feeling like there's no room for failure or growth or any of those things, which is not a very flexible mindset to have. And so it doesn't really give you a lot of space to practice any self-compassion or any of those things. There's no one who understands what I'm going through. There's no one who can help me. Feeling like you're stupid, feeling like you should know things, but you definitely don't. And so, like I said, these are not conscious messages that we send ourselves. I like to think to them as just mental lies. And so once you kind of get a lot better at being able to pick up when you are slipping into that, it's a lot easier to stop and walk yourself through what we call an ABCD method. I'll get to that a little bit later, but it's a thought-stopping technique that helps you, be able to catch yourself in the moment and walk through all of the ways that these things are actually not true and not rooted in any type of reality. So the reason I think that's important is because before we even get to self-care and before we get to what that looks like, I think it's important to understand this concept and to also understand the concept of self-efficacy. So with self-efficacy, some people might be familiar with the term, if you have done anything with like counseling theory or positive psychology, or if any of that is even remotely interesting to you, you might have come across this term. I think I see it thrown around a lot in like pop culture, maybe like a BuzzFeed article or two. And I think sometimes people don't necessarily accurately explain what it means, but I think it's really important to understand self-efficacy in the perspective of self-care, because they really work in tandem to make sure that you reach your goal. So basically, it's the belief that we have in our own abilities, and specifically our ability to meet a challenge ahead and to complete a task successfully. And so basically, when you think about some of these other concepts that we'll go through and talk about, self-efficacy is kind of putting those things into action. So with self-esteem is more about being this person having this positive self-concept, but self-efficacy is actually being able to do the work and being able to use the self-esteem in tandem with self-efficacy to get something done. So self-esteem in terms of graduate students is constantly under attack, and I think that that's one of the major building blocks when we talk about where to focus some of those self-care things. Is definitely here. Motivation. So basically, when we think about motivation in relation to self-efficacy, we're thinking about your desire to achieve. So what was your reason for even wanting to go? What keeps you there? What keeps you coming back? That's always going to be your motivation. And of course, for some people, we know that could be something intrinsic. You're like, I always wanted to go to graduate school. It's just a personal goal. It's going to mean a lot to be the first person in my family. It could be a lot of different things. Some motivation, in addition to that, could be, I want to make more money. I want to make sure that I'm opening up opportunities for myself. I want to make sure that I don't box myself into just one thing. And so thinking about how you have been able to market yourself in a way too. That speaks to motivation, but once you take the desire and kind of amp it up a notch, thinking about self-efficacy, then that's when you're able to turn that into ability. So not only wanting to do something, but being able to have a set of practices that will actually help you do that. And if at any point, like I said, Alante, feel free to stop me if anybody has questions about anything. With resilience, in relation to self-efficacy and resilience, we're thinking about what it means to be successful, but to also have enough of a skill set to where if you happen to fail or what you consider to be a failure, you are able to bounce back. Having a strong sense of self-efficacy means that I will be great in all that I do, and I will be just as great even if I don't reach the goal that I initially set. I'm able to bounce back, regroup, and it doesn't completely set me back to step one. And so that's the importance of thinking about the connection between self-efficacy and resilience. With self-regulation, talking about beliefs and making sure that you have one belief about how you will do something, and making sure that you know, okay, I am able to do these things. I know that I am competent. I know that I'm intelligent. But self-regulation is actually taking that one step further with self-efficacy and making strategies for actually doing that, which is what we'll do when we talk about self-care. And we're going to talk about, okay, you know that you need to practice it, but what steps do you actually have to make a plan for yourself? And last but not least, confidence. It just kind of talks about how you, again, go from just a belief to actual achievement. So what that basically kind of walks you through with all of these concepts is that when you have mastered self-efficacy in a tangible and intentional way, it takes all of these characteristics up a notch, to think about that. But to be clear, self-efficacy is not perfection. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get to this point where you've arrived. It doesn't mean you'll get to this point where, okay, I have self-efficacy and nothing will challenge me. That's not a realistic thought at all. I like to think about it as basically just being able to know what to put in my toolkit, and having at least a framework for understanding what makes sense, for me to be able to continue to move on to each step into the next phase. Okay, so putting it all in perspective, now that we've talked about self-efficacy, the simple way that I like to think about it is that in order to get your degree, you need to at least be able to strengthen your own self-efficacy, especially academic self-efficacy. You want to be able to have a solid plan for self-care and want to have a solid, consistent, and flexible plan. And we'll talk through what that looks like. And you also want to have a support network. Nobody can get that degree alone. I don't care what level you're at. I don't care what's going on. You cannot get it alone. And you shouldn't get it alone, because that's an unhealthy and unfair distribution of effort where you have so many resources and so many other ways to get help. One support network that I've heard Alante talk about is just a lot through back in grad school. And so I'm sure she'll talk a little bit more about what some of those networks will look like for you. But there is no shortage of resources that will help you get this degree. So the key is putting all of those things into action at the same time and making sure that you are maximizing the tools that are available for you. So I still have a nursing brain, even though I am not a practicing clinical nurse. I just could not be in the hospital all day, y'all. It just was not for me. So that's why I'm in the classroom. That's why I do workshops, and that's why I work on a college campus. And I've done that for quite a while now. And so even though you take the nurse out of the hospital, you don't take the training out of the nurse. And so the way we think about things in nursing is that you want to gather as much information as possible, and then figure out you kind of work a little bit backwards, but it's not really that backwards. You gather information, you figure out where you want to be, you make your plan, and then you figure out how you're going to determine if your plan is working. So using that mindset, I kind of walk through what I feel like an appropriate and intentional self-care plan looks like. I will say that there are tons of self-care plans on the internet. A lot of them break things down pretty differently. If anyone is familiar with the dimensions of wellness, a lot of them will kind of break it down through, let's see if I can remember all of them. There's like financial wellness, emotional, spiritual, environmental, physical, can't remember all of them, but if you all Google, you'll be able to find workshops that kind of walk you through different ways to map out self-care for you. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to use a plan, but I find that it's really useful to at least have a framework for thinking through what does a really, again, intentional plan look like, especially whenever you're transitioning to a new part of your life where either what you're doing isn't working already or what you're doing will no longer work based on where you're headed. So I think that both of those things are two really, I think, simple and straightforward ways to think through it. So I kind of broke it down into 4 steps. And then what I'll also do is kind of show it to you in action. So step 1, what you want to do is just think about anything that's going to contribute to your mental wellness while you're in graduate school. So what factors are going to impact your self-care and what are going to be some barriers? So when I talk about factors, if you've done like a campus visit or if you've already kind of gotten an idea of maybe what your fellowship or your assistantship is going to require of you, you already kind of know what your schedule and your responsibilities are going to look like. Do you have children? Do you have a family? What are going to be some things that are going to be competing priorities for you? Excuse me. And where does your self-care fall in that for you? We typically, in a lot of my psychoeducational courses, I use a goals and values approach whenever you're trying to get a behavior to change. And so I'll use it in marijuana because I feel like when I explain it that way, people understand my process. So let's say I have a student who wants to be a doctor, but he's smoking like 10 blunts a day. I mean, hey, I see a lot of stuff. And so basically, if we're in a workshop, I say, okay, what are some of your values? And if he says to me, family, education, having a good job. Okay, cool. What are some of your goals? I want to go to med school. I want to go and marry someone and have children, picket fence, all that jazz. And so if I say, okay, so based on your current behavior, based on where you want to go, and based on what's important to you, then how are these aligning? And so I say, okay, so in order to go to medical school, you're going to have to take a drug test. And so then we say, if medical school is important, if smoking weed is important, and if building a family and a successful life for yourself is important, which one is the priority? And so they're like, med school. And so I say, okay, so then something has to change in order to be in alignment. So when I talk about that, I mean, like you really sit down and think about all the things that are important to you and where you want to go and thinking about how behaviors will probably have to shift in order to get you there. And so for this perspective, of course, graduate school and completing graduate school is going to be the goal, at least one of the goals. And so if there are things that maybe you don't do now in terms of self-care, if you find that you have some pretty unhealthy coping mechanisms, or if you find that you don't know what to do at all, but you know that you don't manage stress well, you don't express emotions in a healthy way, those are things to be aware of and to go ahead and say, okay, I can't just ignore these things and let them go away. I'm going to have to try to figure out a way to kind of talk through those. Also, are there any underlying mental health concerns? The students who I see struggle the most, especially graduate students, are students who have had either something undiagnosed or something that they have left unaddressed. The anxiety and depression levels are through the roof for students that we're seeing entering graduate school, only for them to get there and have an even larger crisis in terms of their mental health. So really sit down and get real with yourself and figure out, okay, what am I dealing with? What's on the table? And what am I going to have to try to identify some gaps for what my self-care looks like right now? So once you've done that, you're going to move on to step 2 and thinking about, okay, what areas of your mental well-being are going to be most crucial to your academic success? And so I have mental well-being, but I want you to go through and also think about for emotional, physical, spiritual, financial, and if there are any others that maybe I haven't mentioned. The key point is you want to figure out, okay, we talked about, what you're dealing with. This is where you start to break down what is a value for you and what is most important. And I'll give examples in the next slide of what a sample plan could look like. Once you've done those 2 things, you're going to move into step 3. You're going to develop, I always say, start super small and develop maybe 1 or 2 goals for each of those areas that you identified a priority for. So it could either be like by day, by week, month, semester, quarter, year, whatever makes sense for you. It only has to make sense for you. Identify your sources of accountability and support. So just because you make a plan, if you don't have anyone to actually have some type of accountability with you, there's a likelihood that you really won't stick to the plan as much as you probably would have had you identified someone to help you. And then for step 4, the key is to really make sure that your plan is flexible. So you want to create very simple action steps that'll help you. And I always say start small, but stay steady. That's the biggest piece. So there's no point in having a plan that is going to be too intimidating, too hard. You're not going to be able to do it. Like, that's just not even useful at all. And then also revisit and adjust your plan as much as you need to. There are going to be different points in the semester where things are kind of going a little crazy for you, and you may not be able to do those things that you thought you would initially do. So always revisit. So what I've done now is I've used myself, and this is actually just some of my own things, thinking about as I get ready to enter the classroom, what are some things that I need to consider in my self-care plan. So for step 1, some of the factors is that I am scared to death about going back into the classroom. And that's probably a lot of different reasons, but that's one of the things that I'm probably most frightened about. I know that I'll be juggling a lot, so I will still be working full time because that's who pays for the school. I'll also be balancing my side hustle, Pedestal Project, classes, and then a lot of other things. I mean, just family, friends. So I'm nervous about the balance. And then underlying factors is that I do suffer with anxiety and depression. And so knowing that since I already have those things that are already there for me, I have to be aware and be able to kind of be tuned into what that looks like when those things are getting worse, when they're getting better. How do I stay ahead of that? A lot easier said than done. But it's just most important to be in tune with you and when you know that something is starting to dip. So I went through each of these things or things that I wanted to make sure I kept as a priority as I moved into the next stage. So mental and emotional kind of go together a little bit, which is not going to be uncommon. But imposter syndrome, so feeling like I deserve to be there, making sure that I know that I'm worthy of being there, not letting doubt creep in just because I'm afraid. Physical, healthy eating, all of those things work together. Spiritual for me, I'm a Christian, but I feel like I'm a non-traditional Christian, so there are some practices that I want to make sure remain consistent even when things get hectic. Then credit card debt, because child, I did not listen to anybody who told me not to get them. So I want to still be able to work through all those things because that is what will help me operate as my optimal self throughout the journey. So I didn't give all of the goals because that would just take a little too long. So I just picked the mental and emotional. And so I said one of my goals would be by the end of each month, I want to be able to name at least 5 times that I felt confident as a graduate student. So that's just an example of something that would help you really focus on those areas that you mentioned and that you feel like were most important to you. And then for step 4, these are just some of the ones that kind of hit a little more on all of the areas. Planning my week on paper. Digital doesn't work for me. So I learned that about myself. And I also know that if I don't actually schedule time for myself, it will not work. You have to put yourself on your schedule just as soon as you put everyone else on there. I go to therapy. I recognize that that's not always an option for graduate students. My best piece of advice would be to first check with graduate, any type of counseling services that are on your campus. I think sometimes graduate students don't realize that the fees that you pay cover all of that too. So a lot of times you can get things at either a free or discounted rate. I know our students get free sessions for as long as they need them. And so I would always say, if that is something you're interested in, definitely try your institution first. You'd be surprised at what kind of support you could get. If you are fortunate to have insurance, then a lot of times your insurance will cover that as a preventative service, and you only maybe pay a small copay or a fee. If you don't have insurance, it might also be helpful to reach out to any therapists that are in the area because they might do sliding scale. So don't necessarily kind of knock out all your options just yet. And then other things that I do, limit junk food, save at least $50 a month. And then I personally enjoy podcasts for people who were kind of hopped on at the beginning. That's something that helps relax me. So I do that while walking my dog, and I kind of get a 2-for-1 deal. So hopefully this illustrates at least how to walk through thinking of a plan for yourself and being able to be intentional on how to do that. If you are one of those people that says, hey, I don't even know about like self-care strategies, I don't know what to do. I think the biggest thing that I aim to let people know about self-care is, one, it does not have to be expensive. So yes, some people consider self-care as retail therapy. They consider self-care as, massages and bubble baths. And I always see the articles like, self-care is more than luxury. It's part luxury, but it's mostly being intentionally in tune with who you are and what makes you feel good. So those things aren't necessarily not self-care. It's just those aren't the only things that are self-care. So when you think about reflective exercises and cognitive techniques, some things that work if you feel like you really want to focus in there. Of course, therapy, like I talked about, I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I talk pretty openly about my therapy experience on my blog and on my social media. So I answer any questions if people have them. Practicing gratitude is usually a really, really good technique for just recentering yourself. I don't know if this message is coming up, sorry. For recentering yourself. And then also journaling. So making sure that you have at least some time to dump through your thoughts, not making your journal perfect or anything, but just kind of dumping through those things. Mindfulness exercises. If you have no clue where to start, I always say start with apps like the Calm app is a really good one. And YouTube has tons of videos that will walk you through guided meditation and mindfulness exercises. Sometimes to be mindful are like really simple things like I do mindful eating, which is it sounds weird, but it's literally to eat without distraction and to really be in tune with your senses. And so thinking about what does my food taste like? How does it feel in my mouth? Like how does this meal make me feel? It sounds kind of cheesy, but you'd be surprised at how relaxing and grounding it can be in very simple day-to-day tasks. Thought stopping, this is one of those techniques that I talked about. And so the process of thought stopping is actually a rational emotive behavioral therapy technique. And I think it's probably one of my favorite techniques because if you're a person who is completely okay talking to yourself or talking through things, I think it really helps with being able to stop an irrational thought. So kind of walking you through what it looks like. If you have something that happens, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say you make a C on an exam. I'll use that. And so you'll walk and then you just are devastated by it. Okay, so A is the action. So the action, whatever it was that happened that triggered you. And it's like an ABC thing. So A is the action. The action was, okay, I got a C. The belief. What did that action make you believe about yourself? So because I got a C, I felt like I wasn't good enough. So the action was getting a C. B was actually having the belief of not being enough. So the consequence is actually what has happened from that. Because I got this C and because I'm feeling like I'm not enough, I'm now discouraged. I don't feel motivated to continue to do work. And I just feel like a failure. So you kind of catch yourself before you spiral. Now, D is where you do the fact checking. Now, I'll be honest, I don't remember exactly what the D stands for. I can look that up and let you know. But I know that that's the part where you pivot. And you basically say, actually, that's not true. Like people make C's and they still will get their degrees. They still will pass. This does not mean that I'm a failure. This does not mean that I will not be successful. And so when you are able to kind of pivot and change that thought at D, then the effect, that's what E stands for, is that you're like, you know what? I know what to do and I'm going to regroup and do better next time. So walking yourself through that process, the more you do it, it gets so easy to be able to catch yourself before you start that mental beat up and before you start saying like, you don't know what you're doing, you should just drop out. Like, it's really, really easy to start spiraling. And so that's probably one of my favorite techniques for being able to stop the thought and kind of move through what some more rational thought. Positive self-talk and affirmations. I use affirmations every morning just because they really help you recenter. Even if you don't believe them, say them even harder, because I think that really helps you start to get that script of encouragement in your brain. And that becomes the normal voice. I know one of the podcasts I listened to, I don't remember which one, I want to say it was the Friend Zone, but they just said, think about when you talk to yourself in your head, what does that voice sound like? Does it sound like someone who's scolding you, or does it sound like someone who's talking to you with love? And what tends to happen is when we talk to ourselves, it's really, really harsh. But when we talk to other people that we love, it's very supportive, very encouraging, very non-judgmental. And so it's really important to start to shift and talk to yourself the way you would talk to people that you love. These are all small things, but they have a huge, huge impact. Environmental and social. I'm a huge, huge aromatherapy person. At any given moment, you will probably smell essential oils going off in my office, in my home. I particularly enjoy a lemongrass and eucalyptus scent. I like to think that's my signature scent. So that's one of the things that I do, but definitely be mindful of the environment that you're in. So if you know that when you're studying or doing whatever, you are not around a lot of natural light, if you don't have clear spaces, you'd be surprised at what doing something in a clean room versus doing something in a dirty room will do. So these are just small things to kind of think about. Creating playlists. Alante talked about how, she's figured out what kind of music helps her get certain things done. So if you don't know those things yet, kind of explore and really be intentional about curating a space that makes you your most productive. And then thinking about physical and spiritual. So again, thinking about diet, exercise are always going to be a huge thing that really makes a big boost in how much productivity you'll be able to have. I am a huge proponent of the Do Not Disturb app on your phone, or the function or whatever. And so I always encourage people to spend at least 1 hour distraction free, not binge watching TV, not on social media, not fake ignoring people, but literally turn your phone off or on Do Not Disturb. I think for me, one thing I used to struggle with is that I felt like I needed to be connected. I felt like everyone needed to be able to get to me. But then what you realize is that when you build those boundaries, people do adjust. They live, they respect it, the world doesn't crumble. And you end up having a little time to breathe that you probably thought you didn't have. So that's something that I encourage people to do, is at least try to spend 1 hour a day of distraction-free time. And then find a hobby. Every hobby doesn't have to be a side hustle, and every side hustle doesn't have to be a hobby. So do something purely because you enjoy it and purely because it makes you feel good. So even in the hustle and bustle of everything, try to fit it in even when you're doing your work. I know that sounds like a super lofty goal, but if you know that, you have to get something else done in the crunch time of the semester, see if there's still a way to figure out the small things that bring you joy. So that concludes my presentation. If any of you all want to connect with me, here's my contact info. Thank you all so much. I hope it was helpful. And then we still have time for questions, I think. So I'll hand it over to Alante.
Oh, I'm muted. Sorry. Yes. That was great. Tekita, thank you so much for giving us this information. I think we talked about self-care in a couple different ways, but you really gave us a framework to go through each step of how we create our own self-care plan. I've been thinking, it's so interesting you do this today, because I've been thinking a lot about what is it that I need in moments of stress and to maintain my wellness. And I want it to be resolute. I want it to be the same thing every single day, but that's just not the way the world works. And I think you just gave us some notes and tips about the fact that it's going to change. And we can, when those moments happen, we can create a new plan or create contingency self-care plans for certain triggers. So I want to say thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to kind of creating a plan. I've never done that. And so I'm going to share my screen for a second, Tekita. And while this is happening, I want you all to, go in here, ask some questions. And of course, you all know I'll read them once we're done with the giveaway. Okay, that's fine.
Do I have to stop share?
It's okay, I got you.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Hold on. That was my mistake. Okay. Zoom. Sure. All right. Okay, it's time for the giveaway. And yes, Beyonce, her champagne, her fireworks inside of a restaurant, because Beyonce can do all things. What are we doing? This 90-minute goal setting session. We talked about a lot of things today. If you want to get more organized, we can create it as a goal. If you want to apply for some fellowships, we can make that into a goal. If you want to create a self-care plan, we can make that into a goal. And we can use those 3 goals and create a week-by-week plan to help you make incremental progress that is grounded in, it's grounded, I won't say grounded in reality, because whatever you put together is going to be realistic as well. But we're going to create a really realistic one, because I understand and can help you think through and ask you questions to think through what it is you want to achieve in a real timeline to do so. And so in this 90 minutes, we'll first talk about what those goals are, why they're important, create our motivation behind it. And the next half of the session, we'll then literally create our plan, and we'll include, moments or breaks into your schedule. So we'll keep notes and events that are going to happen. If you know you're going to be traveling and you want to take that time and be completely distraction free, like Tekita was saying, and taking that time out for yourself, then we're going to incorporate it into your session, into your planner. And your planner is a physical document. We're not going to just be talking about it and then you go on with your time. You're going to leave with a complete document that you can go back to, you can reference, you can tweak as you move forward. And so we usually cover 12 to 16 weeks of time when we make these plans, which is why it takes 90 minutes. And really, the goal is to really help you get prepared as best you can, put you in the best position as we go into the fall semester, okay? It's part of this the pre-dissertation support program I've created called the Scholar Circle. We need our networks. And not every school has like Tekita said, they don't have the infrastructure everywhere to support students of color and women in being the only in the classroom. And so that is why I've created this space. And also, even if they do have those, sometimes the formal channels, you don't feel comfortable sharing certain things. And so you now have an informal place you can come and connect and ask questions and work through. And so that includes live training sessions similar to the way the summit is structured. You have you have access to all of the trainings you've already done from the spring cycle. You get access to the podcasts, and we will do weekly co-working sessions where we will connect with each other. We do have a coffee chat on Sundays. We're still figuring out the cadence of that meeting, but it's time for us to meet and really just check in with each other. We're not doing work. We might be putting our weekly plans together, and we are able to just kind of have a kiki together. So it's a community with the intention of giving you the support you need to care for yourself. It is an act of self-care in itself to tap into networks and realize the support you need and tapping in and getting the support that you want. So if you're interested in the Scholar Circle, you know that you want to do it beyond the giveaway, I really want to encourage you to go to the website down at the bottom. The bit.ly link will take you straight to the website and give you more information. With that, I'm going to do our giveaway. And Tekita, tell me, do you want to work from the top or the bottom?
Let's go from the top.
Okay, so we got 1 through 16. Let's see what number we get, y'all. Birdman hand rub. Let's see. Okay, we got number 7. Okay, Cole. I feel like I've been talking to Cole this whole week, so I'm like, Cole, what? So Cole, I will send you an email along with Brianna and.
What? I'm so happy.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness. I've been on all week, and I was telling my fiance, I really hope I win.
Look at that. See, you made some.
Look at God.
Yes, won't he do it? So yes. Crystal Taylor Cole. I think those are tonight's winners. Congrats again. If you all didn't win this time, I'm actually doing some more giveaways in the emails, for real. I'm like Oprah with the grad school stuff. So check your email. I'll be doing some more giveaways in there, and I'll be following with the replays and all that. But I don't want to take away from Tekita's Q&A time, so I'm gonna stop sharing. We'll switch back over to you, Tekita. You can just just your video. I'm gonna pin your video. And let's see. So 1, Tekita, this was so helpful and timely. Great talk. Excellent. This was fantastic. Thank you so much. This was great. Thank you. So that's from Tashaya, Kyla, Brandy, Brianna, A, Renice, Cole. Brielle and Brianna did put some resources into the group chat. Open Path Collective is a great resource to find low-cost therapy. Okay, thank you for that, Brielle. I'm not familiar. And then everyone also can check out the database Therapy for Black Girls. You know, she has a lot of great resources and a great Facebook group as well.
Podcast is good too.
Say it again.
And her podcast is really good too.
Oh, yeah, I've listened to it a couple times. Sometimes soft voices they put me in a trance. So she does have great content. I completely agree. All right, so I feel like Tekita did a great job because there were no questions.
Okay.
That means you was on it. But I think one thing that you said that really kind of resonated with me was the self-care plan, because I'm like, how did you like write your first did you write yourself first self-care plan? You just kind of like play it by ear? How did you put that together?
I put it in my journal, and then I'm also one of those weird people that has a different journal for different things. So I have like drama journal where it's like, who made me mad and I need to get this out.
Okay.
So there's one journal for that. I have one that is like ideas and just different things that I want to get done. And so I have one that's a prayer journal. And then I have one that is like random. So I put my self-care plan into my idea journal. Because I feel like that is where it makes the most sense. And the key with the plan is to try not to make it feel so structured. So I think that especially a lot of students struggle just like I do with perfectionism. So they find it hard to journal because they're thinking about grammar and they're thinking about how things look and, well, my handwriting looks sloppy. None of those things really matter. So I think that one of the main things to do is just when you walk through it, is more about the question and the process than the plan, if that makes sense. So that's the way I've written mine. I just kind of do it when I'm journaling. I don't have it anywhere where I look at it often, but that could be a useful thing for some people if you know that you're visual and it's helpful for you to kind of like see things every day and remember it. Then I would say put it on maybe like some long legal paper and kind of write it through that way. We had to do care plans on legal paper in nursing school, so that could be useful too.
Dope. Excuse me. So tell us, what's your favorite aromatherapy like system? Did you just go on Amazon and buy something? Do you use reed diffusers? I feel like even that for me, I just got one for Christmas, but I put it on my Christmas because I didn't want to have the stress of picking out a diffuser.
So I don't have a brand. I usually get the ones that are on Amazon. I can literally show you what mine looks like. So it looks like this. Very simple. It lights up all these different colors. So depending on my mood, I'll put it on like a different color or whatever. But I have 3 of those. So I have one by my nightstand, and I use different oils for different things. So I have one by my nightstand, one in my living room, and then one in my office. And so in my office, I try to use energizing scents. So that's more of like the citrusy, the lemons, the like stuff like that. And then for my room, I typically will use either a mix of lavender and eucalyptus or like a vanilla or something, because that helps with sleep and calm. And then at home, I'll usually do the eucalyptus and lemongrass too. I like eucalyptus as a base, but I also change with seasons too. So like in the winter, I do an orange oil and cinnamon bark oil. I know, right? It smells so good. So I just like to mix and get creative. I either get them from Amazon or I get a lot of essential oils from pipingrock.com. They usually have a lot of good sales, and they will also, like, you can get really big jar. I have all my little stuff. Like, this is a pretty big jar of oil. Like, I think it's 2 ounces, but I pay maybe like $3 for it. And it's all natural. Like, they have supplements and everything too. So,
say the name of the place again, please.
Pipingrock.com. So
Piping Rock. Okay, I'm putting it in the group chat, y'all.
I'm gonna be like a YouTuber. Can you see?
Yes, I can actually. Thank you.
I'm a mess, y'all. Sorry. But yeah, no specific brand. If it works, it works. Nice. I just keep it cheap because they all do the same thing.
Touche. And just so you all know, Sarah said she's literally looking on Amazon right now. Groupon has good. Oh, sorry.
I was saying, I suggest getting multiple ones.
Okay. And then Groupon has good diffuser sets with the oils too. That's from Alexandria. So let's go on Groupon. We on a budget, all right? We don't gotta go out and buy the most fancy one.
Yeah.
I put the link in there, and I'm just gonna take some liberties because right now, like, help me, Tekita. I really have felt really unsettled about my environment. Like this weekend, my goal was to like paint my room and kind of like, since I can't afford to buy new things, but to rearrange all my furniture. But then I find that I think I'm trying to avoid something else. So like, how can one kind of work through that thought? Like, is it that I need these other things, this environmental space, this therapy, this blah, 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 or do I just need to like address what's going on?
So my initial thought is that your desire to work through the thought is an issue. And what I mean by that is that means that there is you're trying to get control somewhere. And that means that one thing that we talk a lot, even in my therapy, and then also when I talk to students, is being healthy with a range of emotions, not just the ones that feel good. And so if you are able to kind of really sit with and say, okay, something feels unsettled, just move with it. And usually you'll get to whatever it was. So if you're sitting and you're saying, I really want to move things around, go ahead and move them around. Because a lot of times once you've done it, if you still are feeling unsettled, then okay, it'll lead you to something else. And I know that probably feels very Joyce Meyer, Oprah, like kind of like feel with the universe, but really like your emotions will lead you to your answer. You let them. And so when you try to think through emotion, those two things don't operate the same way. Like thoughts are rational, emotions are not. So when you try to think through them, you usually won't get anywhere. So I say just kind of lead. If you're, I'm a big believer in energy. I'm a big believer that there are going to be seasonal shifts that will cause you to want to purge and do those things. And so I say just lean into them. But that's my personal philosophy. That's not super grounded in research. But that's what I see that works pretty well. Just let your emotions at least kind of lead you to what you feel like is a strong urge, and then you get to the rest.
Okay. I appreciate it.
So rearrange that room, girl.
Yeah, I'm about to, because it's driving me crazy and it's frustrating me. But thank you so much, Tekita, for sharing and helping us to create our self-care plans and thinking about all the different types of self-care and really being a holistic graduate student. We really appreciate you.
Yay, thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And y'all, we're done with the summit. Oh my gosh. Oh, this is my little labor of love. Thank you so much for everyone who's shown up. Those of you who are going to end up watching the replays, thank you for watching the replays. I'm just so grateful. The whole goal, the whole aim is just to help us have a better experience. My first graduate experience was not ideal, and I always wish that someone had sat me down and talked to me and helped me, just prepared me a little bit better for what I was going to embark upon. And so that is why I created this summit and created Black and in Grad School, just to really help those of us who are coming behind. I mean, I'm still in the process, but those of us who are coming to have a better experience. So the fact that you show up, it means that something is going right, and I'm grateful.
This is great. Kudos to you.
Thank you, love. Okay, y'all, you'll get some emails from me later. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Brielle. Thank you, Renise. Thank y'all so much. All right, I'm going to hang out for like a couple more minutes if you have any questions that weren't answered during the summit. Tekita is late, girl, go home. And if you all do have any questions, I'll hang out. I'll just be here. Mallory, the burr, 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 burr. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, you guys are great.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.